Deer are native to all continents except Australia and Antarctica. But they sure have made themselves at home here, wallowing in waterways, pushing through farm fences and being a menace on the roads.
Deer are by far our most charismatic introduced animal.
Deer are an emerging species. They're in all states and territories in Australia, and they're increasing in their distribution and abundance.
There are 6 species, ranging from the most common fallow deer to the large red and sambar. Most were introduced in the 1800s for hunting, but some are descendant of animals that have escaped from venison farms. 5 generations of the Weston family have farmed in the Snowy Mountains. In the past few years, Mal Weston says deer have driven him close to breaking point.
Shooting animals all the time is just, yeah, plain like depressing. I'm into grazing and looking after animals and, and breeding them, not just killing them.
He runs beef cattle, but has spent the nights hunting deer.
So this is an area here that is badly infested with deer, is it?
Yes.
Yep.
As you look.
Oh, there you go. Oh, there's a whole bunch of them.
There's a heap there.
These images were taken on the property of Jindabyne farmer Ted Rowley.
When it's minus 14 in the Snowy Mountains, Prue, and I go shooting deer on a motorbike, I sometimes think I'd much rather be on the sheepskin rug in front of the fire with a glass of good Shiraz.
Grazing pressure from deer has meant some farmers have halved their cattle stocking rate, cutting into income.
I like animals. I've got much better things to do than shoot animals every day. And I have to do that because when the population was low, the Parliament of New South Wales decided to protect them to build the population. We and our neighbours deal with that consequence every day.
Central to the issue of deer management is whether they're treated as a pest or a resource for game hunting, and each state takes a different approach. In New South Wales, the strength of the hunting lobby has protected deer, so they're available for game hunters. That changed in 2019. Now, farmers with a firearms licence can control them as they would other ferals like pigs or goats. Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia, the Northern Territory and the ACT have long taken the hardline approach of treating them as a pest to be controlled, while Victoria and Tasmania still have some protections in place, listing deer as game or wildlife. And this is what farmers in the island state have been dealing with for generations, as many as 100,000 fallow deer across much of Tasmania.
They're a feral animal. They're not ours, they're not the farmers' animals. We're restricted in how we can manage them, and we'd like access to more ability to shoot them.
Deer management here has always been a problem. Back in my father's day and in my day, it takes up a huge amount of time.
Tasmanian game hunters have been limited to a 3-month season, and they have only been able to kill 2 animals at a time. But the state government has been opening up reserves and some national parks for shooting.
If they get into the wild forest, for example in the Tarkine or around Cradle Mountain, they won't be eradicable. It'll be then a job of control. And we have a historical moment now to decide the welfare of the future as far as deer is concerned.
While game hunters are often seen as the solution, there is a conflict between these so-called hunters and those who support mass culls.
When we ask our hunters who hunt on this farm to shoot every animal they see, they usually go a bit funny because they say, oh, I've got a good set of antlers or I've filled the fridge with venison, see you later. That isn't pest animal control. So there's a really big difference between hunting for fun on Saturdays and pest animal control.
A lot of hunters have problems with shooting animals to waste. It's been a prerequisite we put on helping out whenever we can,
is that we want to be able to use the venison just because it's really hard to get a hunter interested in shooting something just for the sake of shooting it.
Professional sharpshooters are a different breed though. They will cull pest animals. In Victoria's high country, the Alpine Deer Control Program employs a combination of recreational shooters and paid professionals like Kirk Stone.
On a horse, it masks your scent and go out in some moonlight and just move up on the deer in those feed areas. So it's basically night hunting as such. Just down the next tree line. Okay, Liz, off you go, off you go, off you go, off you go, off you go. Where's it? Good girl, good girl, good girl. So that's a nice little Samba spiker, probably 18 months. He's in velvet, which means his antlers are still soft and full of blood, and on thermal that shows up like a Christmas tree.
Measurements are taken and blood, in part to be screened for viruses and parasites. Deer can transfer a range of diseases to livestock, including the dreaded foot and mouth.
We know that deer are susceptible to a number of diseases that are potentially problematic for livestock species, and the reason why that is the case is because they are very closely related to the livestock species, and we do know that they use the pastures and livestock resources quite regularly, so there is lots of opportunities for interaction and cross infection.
These hard-hooved animals are tough on fragile environments too. This is a deer wallow in the Alpine National Park, and a sensor camera here reveals shots of a large stag having a merry old time.
So they'll thrash around with their antlers and displace the vegetation and cause these sort of this muddy disturbance, creating bare grounds and this muddy depression that they'll roll around in, and they'll urinate in here and splash it around, and they use that as part of their social system, the males. But unfortunately, as you can see, it does a lot of damage to these really sensitive environments.
Greening Australia says deer are changing the architecture of the country.
They remove the understory and they affect the regenerating trees. The result is that you get a grassland with a woody overstory rather than a complex woodlands that the animals and birds need.
Deer have been identified as such an emerging problem that governments and industry bodies have put together a $9 million monitoring and control program coordinated through the Centre for Invasive Species Solutions.
And this is really the first national approach, if you like, to managing deer. Prior to this, there's been a little bit of work in the various states and territories with deer, but nothing at a large scale.
Population data is being collected, mostly by aerial surveys. Next, we'll be working out how to manage all the different species.
Each of those species has different habitat preferences, slightly different ecology and biology, different response to being hunted or to having a fence erected. So we're not dealing with one species like we would be if we were talking about foxes or feral goats. We're actually talking about 5 or 6 different species, and each one is different.
Wow, that's really complex, isn't it? It's like a big jigsaw puzzle.
It is.
Many say these animals should not be killed and wasted. Venison makes for good eating and is valued by chefs.
Well, we've got this great product which is roaming around here. It's introduced. It's actually getting to plate proportions now, and the flavour of the meat is phenomenal.
But the logistics of wild harvest are difficult. The distance from markets, the need for refrigeration and food safety requirements all make the meat expensive. And those who actually farm deer for a living are concerned the market will be flooded.
The problem is that the market is already under stress. If you look at Tasmania, it's awash with venison in terms of people's households. Many families have got a member or friends who are hunters, and so there's a lot of venison that's in people's freezers, and so our market really is through the restaurant food services trade.
So many options for controlling or capitalising on this most charismatic of ferals.